My name is Heidi Pastor Harf, and I am from Long Island. I grew up at the end of Long Island in a little town called Southampton, and also known as the Hamptons. We were the only Jewish family out there growing up in the 80s. And when I became of age after college, I wanted to get as far away as possible, and I ended up in South America. And I spent 2 decades in Colombia, Cali, Colombia, and I had many careers down there. I had a jewelry store for several years where I made jewelry. Then I began photographing weddings, and then I started my documentary work where I began documenting my family, photographing them every single day, and then also working for a bunch of nonprofits where I would go into very remote and impoverished areas and document for their nonprofits, for their work, for their web pages, for their fundraising, and as well as I would do other personal projects for myself as well in Cali, Colombia, where I was living. And now I'm back in Brooklyn, and I am dived into working on a documentary film, which has spun off from one of my documentary projects. I spent about 6-7 years documenting this phenomenon that I saw in Cali, Colombia, of a bunch of emerging Jews or evangelical Christians that have converted to Judaism. And out of my own curiosity, I began documenting them. I started because I was documenting the Jewish community of Cali, Colombia. I was from a small town, no Jewish people. And when I got married, my husband at the time was from Colombia. His grandparents were immigrants from Germany and Romania, and they were the founders of this Jewish community. But the community was dying. People were leaving just because there's no opportunities in Colombia. And I was, there was a lot of sadness. I was a very nostalgic person, and I thought this community has a lot of story. This community has a lot of rich history. People came over from another country and they built this community and beautiful buildings. And at one point, it was a very big, thriving community. So I took it upon myself to document it. I never finished because while I was documenting them, I discovered this group that I mentioned earlier of evangelical Christians that have converted to Orthodox Judaism. And for me, there was just so many questions, and all I could do was, start asking. And I befriended a lot of them. And one particular family welcomed me in, and I would document them as much as I could because they were very religious. Their day to day before the holidays, the preparation of the holidays, they would invite me to the synagogue, and I photographed them. And I pitched the story to some news outlets, and it was eventually published. And Ezra and I were friends, and he'd hear about my project and what was going on. And when it was published, it got such great reviews, and it became almost overnight this phenomenon. I was interviewed on the radio in Colombia, in podcasts in Colombia, and everybody's like, what is going on here? And overnight, I became this expert on this subject, which I've realized I'm far from, but I certainly have a lot of, knowledge because I, did work with them for many years. And Ezra's like, let's make a movie. And I said, yes, Ezra, let's make a movie. And that's where we are now. We are in the editing process, and it's a documentary called Torah Tropical.
My name's Ezra Axelrod. I'm a music composer and film producer based in Cali, Colombia. And I grew up in a small town in Oregon, in Eastern Oregon, called La Grande, where, like Heidi, I was one of very few Jews. Both of my parents are Jewish, and there were maybe 4 other Jewish families, 5. We had small gatherings at the high holidays and at Passover, and it was a very Rocky Mountain upbringing, hiking, backpacking, skiing, berry picking, morel mushroom gathering in the spring, very country mountain childhood. I then left La Grande and studied in Vermont. I studied music composition, languages, filmmaking, and after college, I moved to London for a decade, where I pursued a music career. I worked in advertising. I had a variety of professional pursuits. and ultimately finished my studies. I did a master's at the Royal College of Music in film composition, and after that started working in post-production and film. And around that time, my husband David decided he wanted to move back to Colombia, to Cali, where he's from, to work on the coca leaf legalization movement. And I thought I'd always wanted to live in Colombia. We've been partners for 19 years, so had a very long connection to Colombia and to Cali. And it seemed like a really great opportunity to explore new kinds of music, new cultures, and be in a very different environment to London. And it's been 6 years in Cali now, and quite an adventure of new narratives, new ways of living, new ways of speaking, assimilating into what is a truly fascinating, eccentric, and awe-inspiring place.